This is a recording of Pete Munson of 446 Spruce Drive, Lady Lake, Florida, 32659. Pete's phone number is area code 904-753-1804. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center on January 29th, 1989 at Pete's home in Lady Lake. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Hey, Pete, if you just start with your name, address, and phone number, please.
All right. This is Pete Munson speaking, and my address is 446 Spruce Drive in Lady Lake, Florida. That's 32659. Phone number here is area code 904-753-1804.
Okay.
Jim is here this afternoon to visit with me, and so far we've had a very nice visit. So he's going to, I guess, ask me to identify some things.
See, Pete, maybe you could start with, I don't know, is there an order to these?
Not really.
Not an order, okay. This is a photograph of 3 individuals with a, what is this, a suggestion thing?
This is a suggestion award that was won by a fellow that was working for me at the time.
Okay.
His name was Don Kenya.
All right.
And if I'm not mistaken, Don eventually became a supervisor at Oldsmobile.
Okay.
This was his line foreman,
The guy on the
Gary
left.
Cuthbert, on the
Okay.
left, and I was the
you were
general
on the right.
foreman on the right.
Okay, and this would have been, let's see, there's a date on here, so this December 16th, 77. So
Yeah.
it was late in 77.
Don, I don't just recall what the suggestion was, but it must have been pretty good. You see, he won
Yeah,
$1,163.
Right. Okay,
So-
that's photo number 1. The second one is another photograph for another suggestion,
Right.
apparently.
Uh-huh.
John, wait a minute.
No.
That's John
Doe.
Q. Supervisor, it says.
Yeah.
Who the devil is John Q. Suggestor? That's who it is.
My memory is failing me, but the fellow that won the suggestions, first name is Ray, and I
All right.
cannot recall his last name.
Okay,
The line supervisor, Neil Betts, a
The guy on the
machine
left.
room foreman on the left,
all right, and yourself
and
on
I
the
was
right.
still the general
Okay.
supervisor on the right.
See, now
That took place down in building 56.
there's no date on that baby either.
That has got to be right about a year later than this one right
Okay.
here.
It almost looks like a 72, a 12, 14, 15, 70, something on the wall back there.
That's probably right, because I know that's right, because that was our die chart
Yeah.
as we progressed along with
Uh-huh. Okay.
completing our dies.
Now, this is a mob scene.
Yeah. And that's
Down in the
really,
press shop.
and that's really something. That's down in building 56.
Okay.
And this was the retirement party for Bert Chittenden. Bert being the fella in the suit right here.
All right, facing us.
Facing us,
Uh-huh.
and he was retiring at that time, and this is Lawrence Ginther.
Oh, yes.
And you may
Yeah,
remember.
I remember Lawrence, yeah.
Okay, Lawrence Ginther was the superintendent at the time, and Bert was the general foreman.
Okay.
And it was traditional at noontime that all the die division would gather, and we would present the person retiring with the gift
Oh,
that
yeah.
we had
Uh-huh.
taken up a collection to give.
All right.
And that's what's taking place right here.
So this is all the Die Room people that were there at that juncture.
That's a goodly portion of them,
Mhm.
probably 75%.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
And you can see some of them are in the coveralls.
Oh,
and
sure.
some of
Just
them,
came right off the
come-
floor.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
that's just on our lunch hour right there.
All right.
When,
See, there, it says
happened
1958.
in 1958. And that's rather unique because when Bert retired, I was the one that took his place on salary.
Oh, okay.
I went on salary in the die division at January 1st, 1959,
All right. Right
and,
long after him.
right after Bert
All right.
retired.
So this is, the presses that you see are your spotting presses? that
Those
you
are our
have?
spotting presses. Those are the old 50-ton Bliss presses.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Oh,
now.
yeah. Yeah. Long
But
gone.
those, you probably remember those
Yes, I
down there in
do.
building 56.
Yeah. All right. Okay, now the last one is another sort of similar mob scene,
Yes, it is.
only smaller group here.
Smaller group, and the reason that it's a smaller group is that the fella right here in the suit is Walt Miller.
All right.
Walt is retiring at this particular party,
All right.
And again, you've got Lawrence Ginther as the
Yep.
superintendent. Bert Chittenden is still there, you see.
Oh, with the student to the right.
So
okay.
this picture actually took place before Bert retired.
before this
So
one.
it might have been somewhere along
Uh-huh.
about 1956 or 57, somewhere
right.
in there.
All right.
And again, you've got the fellows that worked more directly right
Yeah,
with Walt.
And you're in,
All die division.
this was the office I see in the background. That must have been the
That was the office
Die
right
Room
on the
office?
corner that Bill Freeman
Oh, the
used to
Bill
have,
Freeman
right?
office.
Yeah,
All right.
because this
yeah.
is the spotting press, and we're
Okay.
looking right directly
Yeah.
south.
All right.
Jim.
Okay. Good. So we know where that is. Okay. Okay. This last one is a group of well-dressed guys. And what was the occasion here?
Well, the reason we're well dressed is that we were having our graduation party at that time. That is the original 9 apprentices that started in July 14th, 1947,
All right.
with Guy Hudson as the
Oh,
instructor.
yes, back in the back.
And
Oh, on the
Floyd
right.
Wright has got to be here somewhere. Where's Floyd? Right here. Floyd Wright
Number-
took over as the assistant to Guy Hudson.
All right.
So he was kind of our
Number two
Number
in the
two in charge.
in the front row.
right.
Okay. From the
And
left.
I'll try to name some of those fellows if
Okay.
you'd like
start,
to have
if you
them.
can just start on the upper left and kind of come across.
Right.
Then if we don't know, we'll pass over it.
Yeah, I'm going to call that Ed Dinspire.
All right.
Ed Dinspire, and he was in the tool room.
Okay.
And this is Freddie
Oh, that's
Gilhart.
Freddie Gilhart.
Freddie Gilhart.
I'll be
You know
damned.
Freddie.
I hardly recognize him
Okay,
there.
Freddie ended up as a
Okay.
superintendent over
Oh,
at
sure.
the
Yeah.
forge plant.
Yeah.
Back behind there, I think, is that's John Kelly.
All right.
John Kelly was in the tool room.
Okay.
Then we come with Floyd Wright,
Yeah.
the assistant instructor.
Yeah.
Doug Lenz,
Oh, yes. Okay.
Howard Hogue,
Okay.
uh,
That-
another Kelly. Can't think of his. John Kelly was
All
in the
right.
tool room.
All right. The guy in the back
Freddie Sedlak,
with the bow tie.
Frankie Sedlak,
All right.
Frankie Sedlak, and of course
guy,
Guy Hudson,
yeah.
our
Yeah.
wonderful instructor, and Charlie Anderson,
Okay.
and yours truly, Pete Munson.
Okay. How about that?
And that
That's
was
great.
the first group of apprentices that graduated
And that's
out
what
of Oldsmobile after
this certificate is also
designates.
part of.
This denotes
Uh-huh. All right.
our graduation right here.
Okay. And you mentioned that was the first group after the war?
Yes, yes, it was,
Okay.
Jim.
Okay. Very good. Now, let's see, Pete, this is we're a little out of from timing standpoint, but this is must have been the 77 million car thing that you had down in the press shop for your group.
Right, and we actually went up to the final assembly where that car was
Okay.
put at a certain period, and that day, for some reason or other, I don't believe I was in there, unless that's my picture there. I guess maybe it
Oh,
is.
that looks sort of like
Yeah, I
that,
guess
eh?
it is.
So who
But,
are all these guys, Jim?
Oh, I'm trying to think here now. There's Laverne Aves right there, second from left.
All right.
There's
You think that
my
might- third from
Pete
the left?
Munson right there.
Okay.
And that's Steve that used to work in our office. I can't remember his name now.
All right.
There's Al Sikora.
Back with the glasses.
There's Ronnie Bohr. You may know Ronnie. He's been there years and years. Gene Klotz.
Okay, yeah, remember Gene.
Arnie, gosh,
Okay.
can't remember that.
That's all
And
right.
that's George White. George
All
White.
right.
And we tried to get all of the die division and supervisors that particular day,
Uh-huh.
but we
Yeah.
missed a couple. you know.
Problem is to get everybody.
Yeah.
Now tell me about the house raising business here a little bit.
Well, again, this was back in 1954. And we had a supervisor at that time called named Ken McManus. And Ken was well-liked and was a very good supervisor in the die division. So he had some tough luck. He lived on a farm out by Williamston.
Okay.
And by golly, his house caught fire and it burned right to the ground, and it just left Ken right out in the cold.
Yeah.
So, being well liked as he was, a group of us sort of got together, maybe about 15 or 20 of us, and told Ken if he gets all the lumber out there, we'll come out one day and we'll put it up. And that's what sort of happened right here. We just,
A one-day
got
affair.
out there and at daybreak and before dark that night, we had the roof on that, 24 by 24,
Uh-huh.
which eventually turned out to be his garage
Oh, okay.
on the
Uh-huh,
house that he
sure,
had built.
yeah.
But, as it was right there, it was a place that he got into and lived there probably for a year
Uh-huh.
until
He got the regular
until he
house.
got his complete house built,
Uh-huh.
and then this turned into be his
His
garage.
Okay, and all these little Polaroids were part of that day.
Yeah.
that- As people were doing things.
Sure. I'm hanging out the window right there.
All right. That's in the first Polaroid.
Again, I guess I got up on the roof up
All
there.
right.
That's Forrest Cherry, who was very instrumental in this thing.
All right.
He was one of the leaders.
With the handsaw.
He was a very intelligent builder. Yours truly got
Again,
in
with
there
the
again.
real handsaw.
That's Carl Miller right
Carrying a
there,
piece
who
of
was the leader for Ken McManus. Can't tell you who those fellows are right there.
Just a minute here. Guy by the name of Mac and Cherry.
There's Mac,
McNett,
Cherry.
and Alden.
Yeah, and this Art Alden again was one of the very good leaders in that. He was very knowledgeable in building.
Okay, this is all your good old cars.
Yeah, all Oldsmobiles, of course. And again, we were perched up. There's Kenny Neve was there, Leonard Linneman,
Uh-huh.
and Paul Marcos. Paul
All right.
Marcos was a very good builder, carpenter. Choker Baldwin, right? Joker Baldwin up there. Yeah. And all those fellows at one time or another worked for Ken. But this is just the frame.
Right.
That's old Mac is his name. That's all I can tell you right there. But he was quite an elderly gentleman, you know.
Yeah.
But he was right out there working with all of us. That looks like Leonard Linneman there.
Yep, it
Jim
is.
Berry, that's who that fellow was.
The older guy.
The older fellow, Jim
Okay.
Berry.
This is Lennon.
Yeah, Linneman right there.
Here we are at the construction
I
site.
guess that must be just before everything got underway. But that's about the extent of
Okay,
it.
that's neat. That's an excellent description of all that. And I think, Pete, here. Describe for me this Die Room plaque that's 1776 to 1976.
Okay, that's just about a 5 by 8 piece of metal that was made with a pointed sharp tool from our tracer machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of unique in that our programmer wrote the program for that to make some of these during our celebration in 1976.
Okay.
So it's something that very few of them were made.
Yeah.
Um,
Very unique with the curved dash and everything on there.
It was just,
Yeah.
I thought something that
Very unique.
some people would be interested in seeing.
Very unique. The rest of the items, I think, are pretty well identified as to what their occasion were, so. Okay, I think then what I'll do is shut this off. Okay, Pete, maybe you could start then with where it was you started and when you started at the plant and what you were doing.
Right, I'd be happy to. I can remember the date very distinctly because it was very important to me. July the 14th, 1947.
Okay.
That was my first day at Oldsmobile, and I was scared stiff.
Oh, really?
But I was very fortunate to be selected as one of the first apprentice die makers to go through the die room after World War II.
All right.
And Bill DeFrance was my supervisor at that time, and can't think of the general foreman right there at the time. Maybe it'll come to me.
Who was the superintendent of the die room at that time?
We didn't have a
You
superintendent
didn't have
at the
a
time.
superintendent. All right.
They had a general foreman. That was it.
All right.
They started started us out. There was three of us
All right.
in the die room, and we were assigned different jobs. Working on the lathe was my first job,
All right.
and I had to work alongside of a journeyman because I didn't even know what a lathe did.
You never seen one
Never
before,
had
hardly?
seen a lathe to know what it did. I didn't know
Okay.
what a die was or
Uh-huh.
anything else.
All right.
And these people were just marvelous to work with. We worked a lot of hours. We worked long hours.
Yeah.
I progressed on through my apprenticeship, taking different machines and then getting bench work, so we called
Okay.
it, so we could build dies,
Yeah.
doing die tryout work. And we finally, at the end of about 4 years, graduated.
Okay.
And those were some of the pictures that I
Yes.
previously pointed out to
Yeah.
you, Jim.
Did that program, did you have classwork too?
Yes, we did.
As well as what I call the practical, the hands-on
Yes,
sort of thing?
yes, we did. The related training amounted to 4 hours classroom per week.
Okay.
And the 4 hours classroom per week, Guy Hudson, our beloved instructor, made sure that it amounted to about 12 hours homework.
Oh, uh-huh.
which we all
Yeah,
needed, of course.
Yeah.
Very strong in mathematics, Guy was.
Okay.
Excellent mathematician.
Were most of the people in the apprentice program at that juncture, Pete, coming from a kind of a knowledge base of zero, so to speak, in die work?
Yes,
Okay.
they all had.
Uh-huh.
To the best of my knowledge, nobody had had any experience
Uh-huh.
because we were all similar age, you know.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think almost all of us had been in World War II.
Uh-huh.
So
How did
we
you
just didn't have that.
how did you get pointed at the die room in the first place, so to
Well, it
speak?
was very unique in the way that happened, Jim. When I first came back from the World War II, my brother was a night superintendent at Dale Steel Products, which is another little small stamping
Yeah.
plant in the city of Lansing over
Yeah.
on Main Street.
Yeah.
And his supervisor was Fred Zaleski. I'll never forget the name, Fred Zaleski.
Okay.
Sort of took a liking to me, and he helped me out very much. As a matter of fact, Fred was acquainted with the apprentice program that was going to start up at Oldsmobile
Mm-hmm.
in a short time.
Yeah.
And so he came to me and he said, Pete, he said, you're just running a press over here and you're running the shears and you're unloading steel off from a truck. And he said, you're going to do that the rest of your life. And you're making $1.50 an hour. And which I was, which was good money at that time, 1946. And he said, why don't you try to go over to Oldsmobile and take an exam and see if you can't get in on the apprentice program over there. And I thanked him very kindly, and I went over and made arrangements to take the apprentice testing program. And by golly, I understand there was a few over 150 that took that exam, and only 9 of us made it. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
And
was that a written exam, Pete?
yes, it was. It consisted of more than one exam, more than one written exam.
Yeah.
And I think it took 2 days to take it.
Wow.
So it wasn't anything simple.
Yeah.
And I feel very, very fortunate.
Oh,
One of the best things that ever happened to me in my life.
That's great.
So, I really got to thank Fred Zaleski for getting me started over there.
Well, and after you went through that program and you graduated or whatever they call it.
Yes, that's what I was at.
Then what did you end up having as your task?
Well, I was then a journeyman die maker.
Okay.
And I worked in the die room.
This is all in plant one.
All in plant one, right there in building 56.
Okay.
And I worked in the die room for a couple of years. And then as part of the die room, we also had die tryout, if you may recall.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then those tasks were different, so to speak?
Yes, they were a little different. In that the die room, we more repaired the dies if they could not be repaired in the press.
Okay.
Or we would build new dies.
All right.
That was the die room responsibility.
Okay.
Die tryout would take the new dies as they come in for each model run, and we would buy about 85 to 90% of our dies from vendors outside.
Mm-hmm.
That is out of Detroit, and out of Grand Rapids and Toledo and so forth. When those dies came into Oldsmobile, they were not what we would consider to be productive dies. They could not produce a sheet metal part to specific part prints and make a qualified part in the quantity that we needed.
Okay.
And the quality that we demanded. And so we as die trial people had to take these dies, put them in the presses and refine them, so to speak, put the finishing touches to them. Sometimes it got a little bit major also, but mostly it was finishing touches. And I really took to that type of work and I loved it very much. And so there was a die trial division as part of the die room. And so I requested to work in that. And thank the Lord, I got a chance to do that. Lawrence Ginther was very instrumental in helping me do that. And he got me started. Lawrence Ginther was in charge of die trial.
Okay, but the die trial guys, did they work for the die room?
Yes.
Okay.
They were part of the die room.
All right. Okay.
And
so Lawrence was a foreman at that juncture?
Lawrence was a foreman at that juncture.
Okay.
Vic Forrester was the general foreman in the die room.
Oh, okay.
When I went
the guy you were trying to remember.
That's the guy I was trying to remember in the first place. Right. But anyhow, at that time, Lawrence Ginther was working for Vic Forrester. Well, it didn't take only a couple of years until Lawrence Ginther became a general foreman. And then a couple of years beyond that, Lawrence Ginther became the superintendent and Vic Forrester was working for Lawrence. But I kind of rode right along with Lawrence Ginther, I guess, in that he took a liking to me and I really liked my work. And it was just a few years. I think I graduated in 1950 from the apprenticeship. And I think January 1st, 1959, I was on salary. And so I figured that was a pretty good jump. And about 3 years, the 3 previous years to that, I had been what they call a leader. And so I was very pleased at that. So the last 21 years that I worked at Oldsmobile, I was on supervision. Okay. I was a foreman in different departments, different buildings, that is 52, 56, 37, and so on and so forth. And I also spent approximately 3 years over at Plant 3 when they first started up over there.
All part of the die.
All part of the die division.
Or die
division.
The die division.
Yes. And the die tryout being a section of the die division.
Okay.
So when they first started up over there, I went over there and helped get that started. Okay. Until the time when, let's see, who was it that retired? I can't remember now who retired when I became a general supervisor, and that was about 1971. Okay. Just can't remember now.
But that was at that point you were still back at Plant 1, or had you?
I was at Plant 3.
You were at Plant 3 at that point.
And then when I was made a general supervisor, I was moved back to Plant 1.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I worked in the die room and in die trial both at that time. Yeah. So I worked as a general supervisor for 9 years, and I retired in 1980, January the 1st. Okay.
Now, Pete, if you can, go back to like the very first few times you were working with dies, and after you got your journeyman's card, so to speak. And can you describe maybe what a typical day might have been, and then come forward in time and do that as it might have been in later years, so you might be able to contrast how it changed, if it did. Maybe it didn't change in those years.
Well, I'll try to, Jim. A typical day, you might say, let's say a year after I graduated.
Yeah.
so that we can go in and we come to work at generally 6:30 in the morning, as I remember, when we worked the day shift.
Mhm.
And then, of course,
Did you
we
have-
alternated
You had two shifts?
shifts. We alternated
Okay.
day and afternoon shifts.
Okay.
But let's call it, we're working on the day shift, and we come
Yeah.
to work about 6:30 a.m. or at 6:30 a.m.
Okay.
And when we come in, we might find that during the night, afternoon shift, they maybe had an accident with a die.
Okay.
Maybe they got a couple of parts stuck in it and they broke this die.
Mhm.
So production being the most important thing at Oldsmobile, we jumped right on that with maybe 2 or 3 men, whatever the
Mhm.
job required. We would make our repairs, and we would never get a break, so to speak. You always had people right there working. You never left that job set idle.
Mm.
It was termed, let's see, it was termed as a hot job.
Mm.
A hot
Okay.
job.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, you would try to get your most proficient people on that type of a job.
Mhm.
Also, you know, being a good supervisor, you'd do that. So I always liked to get those hot jobs because I had all the help I could stand, and if I needed machine work done, why I could get that done, you know, and it was really
Mhm.
moving.
Mhm.
And I seemed to be able to work under pressure. I like pressure.
Mhm.
And I guess that's part of die trial. You're out there and you're on the firing line, and you're working under pressure.
Mhm.
So it's really pretty good. And so the day went along, just more got started work, and it seemed like it was the end of the shift.
Mhm.
I guess you'd call that liking your job,
Sure.
which I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Now those kinds of things, Pete, where you had to patch a die, that took. Did you weld and grind and machine and all that kind of stuff?
we would.
Or?
That's right. You would be welding, and then after you're welding, you'd have to hand work that down.
Okay.
Whatever machine work was required, you know, to begin
Yeah.
with. It involved the entire process.
Okay.
It was cooperation for the machine floor, the welder, the die maker,
Mhm.
and just any number of people.
Did the production guys call it breathe down your throat a lot?
Well, sometimes they did. And then on the other hand, I can't say that they did.
Yeah.
All their job was to tell us how bad off they were for parts.
Yeah.
And they were always pretty honest about that.
Yeah.
They would come to us and say, I've got X number of parts, and it will carry me through production until tomorrow at 3:00.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
We knew we had to have that thing ready at 3:00 to produce parts, or we were going to shut the line down.
Yeah.
I can't ever remember shutting the line down. And heaven forbid if anybody ever does. But I can't ever remember shutting the line down. And so it was a cooperation type thing, again, with production and the die division. They would be honest with us, and they would tell us, you know, these are the number we got. We're good until right now.
Yeah.
And Whitey Liggett was good about that. I don't know if you remember Whitey.
Oh, sure do. Yeah.
But a marvelous person to work with. And he knew just where he stood, you know, all the time, just like that with those parts.
Well, now, did that process that you sort of described there is kind of a typical kind of, did that change any over those period of years that you spent there, Pete? Or was that same kind of occurrence, what would have happened 10 or 15 or 20 years later?
You know, Jim, the same thing would have happened. If we had a busted die, we had to go through the same process.
Okay.
Now, of course, the die might be a fender die, as opposed to another time might be a bumper die, or just a smaller
different
die.
part, perhaps.
You know, you see some of these fender dies that run in these 100,000 ton presses. And my gosh, you know, they weigh 50 and 60 tons.
Yeah.
All our cranes can do is to pick them up.
Yeah.
And so, and then we have other dies that, you know, are the size of your notepad right
Mhm.
there,
Mhm.
and they can turn them over with their hands. But the principle of a large die is still the very same principle as a small die.
Did the die technology change then over that
Oh,
period of time?
definitely, yes.
What happened there?
Okay.
Maybe that's a way to approach it a little bit.
Okay, sure, good point. In the beginning, back in the early 50s, we had dies that were what we might call single action dies.
Okay.
They would, with one stroke of the press, make.
Okay. Keith.
But in the early 50s, we had single action dies
Yeah. Okay.
that would not make only one part at a time, and so therefore you might be able to produce only, oh, we'll say 150 parts per hour.
All right.
Whereby as time and technology improved, we would get what we call progressive dies.
Okay.
In other words, under the same die shoe and under the same stroke of the press, we would have a small die here, a small die in the next progression, and the next progression, and the next progression. And we might have as many as a half a dozen small little dies, where each time you pressed a part, you performed a particular operation on each section of that die.
Like doing 6 different operations.
Right.
Right
all
in
at
rows.
once. And that was, and of course, the presses themselves improved also.
Okay.
From the old presses that might take 8 or 10 seconds to make a complete cycle, we probably cut that down to 4 or 5 seconds.
Okay.
With the speed of the press, and still perform a good quality part. So that was a very strong thing that handled. Another technology type thing that came through was the automation of removing parts from the dies.
Okay.
Whereby in the beginning, early 50s, we used to have to put a part in and then reach in and take it back out.
Now, when you say reach in, you didn't reach in with your patties, did you?
We had tongs.
Okay. All right.
Metal tongs.
All right.
Okay. And
but it was all done manually.
It was all done manually. Right. So later on, the development was that we, as an operator, would still place the blank sheet into the die, and then the press would make a cycle. The part would be stamped out into the proper form. It would automatically lift up by lifters, as we call them, operated by air cylinders, hold itself up there momentarily. An iron hand would come in from the back of the press, grab that and pull it out and throw it into a gun in the back. Okay. So it just speeded up the process entirely, and also was a safety factor. So that technology really became perfected, even to the point of pulling huge fenders out of the dies. Okay. And can you imagine putting a blank in, running it over, drawing a fender, and an iron hand going in there and picking that out without scratching the fender and dinging it all up? That's quite a job.
No, I got to assume that all of that happened not without problems, so to speak.
Oh, definitely.
Can you think back to some of what I call the growing pains that we had as we went through that process?
Oh yeah, sure. We used to when you would first be able to lift that part up, the timers that we had, you had to hold it up there momentarily until this iron hand could come in and pick it out. And the timers were not perfected. We had to improve on that. Okay. That was an electrical part. You see, you had to work with the electricians and the plumbers and the die trial people and the machine repair, and they all had to work as a group. So that was one problem that we had. Another problem that we had was the anti-repeat cycle that the presses now have, but they didn't have in the first place. So a press might make one cycle, and instead of coming up here to the top and stopping, it might come right back down again.
Oh my goodness.
And you can imagine what would happen if you had your hand in there.
Oh,
See, that's
yeah.
where you see a lot of these one-armed guys,
uh-huh.
old timers that
Yeah.
used to work in a press room.
This is long before the safety programs
Long
existed.
before the safety program. So when the press did come back down, in place of cutting off a human hand, it cut off the iron hand.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
And so that caused damage to the die also. But at least we didn't have a human hand in there. And who was it that was doing such a great job with the safety department at that time?
Stone, J.R. Stone.
Stone.
Bob
Who
Stone.
worked right under him?
Johnny Hines.
No, the next
Oh,
guy.
Brainerd.
Brainerd was one. Who was another one?
Oh.
You got three of them.
The only other guy I can think of is Van Valera.
Van was the guy I was thinking of.
All right.
Van helped us more in the press room than any of the rest of them did. It seemed like the others were good, but Van seemed to concentrate there in the press room. And he did a marvelous job. But anyhow, we all worked together, and this anti-repeat cycle on the press was developed. Another thing that came along, Jim, was if you remember when we set up the hood and the inner panel down there, the whole welding system, it was set up in sort of a U-shaped type thing that covered probably 100 square feet. And we automatically put the hood inner panel into the hood outer panel and welded that thing, transferred it to different stages, and it came out a completed hood.
Yeah.
And you may or may not remember that.
I remember that, baby.
Another thing was
never
the hood.
worked.
Oh, yes, it worked. The hood line itself was developed automatically. We used to slide that hood blank into the draw die, and we'd pull it out of there with iron hands. And we had a transfer machine that we turned that thing over 180 degrees, turned it over, and slid it into the next die, which was a trim operation, trimmed it off, took it out of there with an iron hand, went into the next flanging operation, took it out of there with an iron hand, and went into the last operation, which was a reflange and pierce, and it came out of there with an iron hand and onto a conveyor. Never any dings in it. Once in a while.
Yeah. Now that must have been entirely different than it was when you first got there.
Oh, yes. When I first got there, we would take and we would go into one press and we would form that hood.
Yeah. How many guys would be in a press like that?
We would have 2 men going in and 2 men coming out.
Okay. A whole bunch of folks it took.
And I would, and then of course we had to tip it up on the side. I'm going to guess roughly that it took 12 people to make a hood when I first started. I know for a fact that it took 5 when I finished. Less than half.
Yeah. And I suspect the machinery ran more rapidly, did it?
We were running more hoods. We would run, it was not unusual to run 300 hoods an hour. And in the beginning, when we had about a dozen people running it, if you ran 125 to 150, you were doing great.
Okay.
So we doubled the amount of production with half the amount of people.
So there was a significant improvement in what I would call the technology over that period of time.
Definitely, Jim. Yes, very definitely.
In the early days of those kinds of things, Pete, did people on the production side of the house feel comfortable with the automation, or were they of the mind to get this darn stuff out of here because it's more of a hindrance than a help?
We had a few people that were fighting it all the time. By and large, I think everybody was pushing it pretty good. They could see the advantages safety-wise, production-wise, cost savings, and so on and so forth. But you always had this few, which you're going to have, I guess, wherever you're at, that seem to think that no, it's progress and it's not going to work. You know, it's a change. And whenever you try to change things, you've always got somebody that's sort of fighting you a little bit. But I would say by and large, most of the people were pretty much behind it. They understood what the
Mhm.
program was.
Mhm. Did the hourly folks feel comfortable with those kinds of changes over the years as we progressed from many people to not so many people in what I would call the production arena?
I think they felt extremely comfortable with it because soon after they learned that this automation, as it was classified in one grouping, soon after they learned that automation would make their job easier. For example, if we take this hood after we've drawn it and we bring it out of the die with two people and we turn it over and then two people have to put it into the trim die, uh, where that was four people and heavy manual work turning
Yeah.
that thing over.
Sure.
They could very easily see that one person stood at the corner of the die and this machine turned that thing
Mhm.
over for them. And heck, all they had to do is just take a hold of that with their finger, sometimes not even that,
Mhm.
and just guide it into position.
Mhm.
Because we actually improved our gauging on these dies too, to the point where uh, when that hood would slide into that die, if it was off an inch or so, we blended our gauging in so that it would
Mhm.
guided it right
Mhm.
into position.
Mhm.
And this operator soon began to see that, heck, he says, all I got to do is stand here and push this button
Mhm.
and everything else does the work. So they soon picked it up.
You mentioned gauging, Pete. How did the what I'll call the quality of the parts we were making change any from start of your time to the end?
Definitely improvement. Oh, yes. Back in the early 50s, we could take a sheet metal part and through manual handling of this part, it's bound to get some bumps to it.
Mm-hmm.
When we could handle it automatically, we knew that on the automatic system, that part was going to be handled perfectly every time.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be handled the same every time, I should say. And so we could compensate for that. If we had a little mark that we were getting over here on this right-hand front corner, all we had to do is adjust our automation
Mm-hmm.
and we could get rid of that, and we were rid of it once and for all.
Yeah.
Whereby if you had the human hand handling it, you might get a mark up here on the right-hand front corner one time, and then the next time you're going to get it over here on the left-hand side, and you didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So automation actually improved the quality of the part.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Now, when you came, the Die Room was in 56. Building 37 wasn't there. The 34 was 52. Can you remember what was going on where in the press shop, sort of?
I'll try. It seems like out in building 52, I'll start there. We worked on oil pans. We made the oil pan out there, one of the major projects.
All right.
As a matter of fact, that Walt Miller that I showed you on that picture that retired in there was one of the main cogs in the oil pan line.
All right.
So that was quite a process. Well, we made some bumper ends. You remember when they had just the ends on the bumpers?
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have the full complete bumper wrapped around because we didn't know how to draw them all the way around. We just had to make the end and then put a middle in. But the technology improved there to where we could make the whole thing around.
Yeah.
But anyhow, we made the ends out there. We made a number of brackets for the engine. Generator brackets where they adjust the generator to tighten up your belt, you know. And let's see, the rear quarter panel was made out there. Of course, we still had a rear fender was made out there.
All right.
We made all of our stainless steel sheet metal or metal parts out there.
Like molding?
All the moldings. If you remember when that happened, that was about when? About 1955 or 1956 or 57. Somewhere along in there. We at Oldsmobile took on the job of making all of our stainless steel moldings that went along
Mhm.
our
Mhm.
side of the car, underneath here,
Mhm.
and along the trim on the door
Oh, yeah.
down there.
Yeah.
Remember when we started
I
that?
remember the old stainless steel line.
Well, again, that was a challenge that was given to me when that
Okay.
first came. And a fellow by the name of Russ Barnes, who was an experienced die maker and die tryout man that came to us from Rio.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of under Russ's wing, and he helped me an awful lot.
Okay.
But the two of us kind of were the head people on that stainless steel line.
But no, stainless steel we'd probably never done much with, had we?
We had never
Never touched
made
it.
any stainless steel at
Yeah.
Oldsmobile,
So that.
and we were scared of it. We didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so, my gosh, we would go in there with little fine hones and hone that stuff, you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah.
we would handle it with kid gloves, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't but about a year until we learned the ropes on that thing too, and we
Mhm.
increased the production and
Mhm.
made it pay off for us over there.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you now, we spent some harrowing times over there on that stainless steel line for 3 or 4 years.
Uh-huh.
Boy, I'll tell you, I'll never forget that. And that stuff, when that stainless steel, you know, and when you handle sheet metal, you're going to get a little scratch, you're going to
Yes.
get a little cut.
Yes.
And boy, oh boy, did that burn.
Oh.
You know, you get a cut and
Yeah.
sometimes it'll burn, sometimes it won't.
Yeah.
But seems like there was something in that stainless steel that, my gosh, that little cut there would
Yeah.
really burn.
Yeah.
So you learn to use your gloves
Uh-huh.
and you use them properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There must have been a lot of handling problems, handling that shiny metal. And
There was.
all of that kind
There
of thing.
was. We used to use a little hand lifter with a rubber suction cup on
Oh,
the end.
yes.
That they had mostly women because this was light work.
Yeah.
And the women, they figured had a little daintier touch
Okay.
and all like
Sure.
that, which sounded reasonable.
Uh-huh.
And yes, they'd put that stainless steel part in this die and they'd form it or they'd trim it or flange it, whatever the operation called for. And then they'd have to reach in and get that back out. We
Using
didn't
this
have any
little suction
automation.
cup thing.
Yeah, we had no automation on that line
Oh,
at
yeah.
that time. But
Was that a progressive sort of line, Pete, or did each operation generally make a part complete, so to speak?
no, that was a progressive line. There
Okay.
might be as many as 8 or 10 dies
Mm-hmm.
to make one part.
All right.
Sheet metal, so to speak, like you would make a fender, was far more flexible and would draw to shape and hold its shape better
Mm-hmm.
than stainless steel. Being very rigid and stiff,
Mm-hmm.
it would wrinkle and buckle.
Ooh.
And the way you had to treat stainless steel was completely different than sheet metal.
Mhm.
It was a whole new ball game.
Uh-huh.
It was tough. It was tough.
A lot of spring back and
A lot of
stainless.
spring back in
Uh-huh.
it. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, sure was. And you take a cutting edge where you would trim around
Yeah.
the shape.
Yeah.
You could trim sheet metal on a fender or a bumper twice as easy as you could on stainless steel. Your clearance, your die clearance from the top to the bottom
Yeah.
had to be exact with stainless steel.
Did that cause a lot of extra wear on dies and those
Oh,
kinds
yes,
of things?
very much so,
Uh-huh.
especially when you flange them down
Yeah.
and you form.
Fold it over.
My gosh, we had a terrible time discovering what kind of steel, and we finally ended up with what they call Amco bronze. Amco bronze would form the flanges and hold the shape
Hold an edge, kind of.
better than anything we run into.
Huh.
And Amco bronze was very, very difficult to work with
Oh, was
in
it?
that it was hard
Uh-huh.
and brittle.
Uh-huh.
Yet it would not score and cause scratches
Uh-huh.
on your metal.
Uh-huh.
But when it come to wearing and you had to weld it, it was very, very difficult to weld.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one thing just offset another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were the dies generally made out of steel or iron?
There were sections of them made out of steel and
Uh-huh.
sections of them that
With this
actually
bronze
did the
in it.
work would be the bronze. And then we also found out that air hardening tool steel would hold up on the cutting edges better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I don't remember how long we kept that in there. Do
It
you?
was about 4 or 5 years, I
Uh-huh.
think, something like that,
Yeah.
that we kept those.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
I know,
That was back in 52, or not 1950, but in building 52.
Building
so took place.
52, right.
Yeah.
yeah, that was one of the big things out there in building 52, starting in about 56 or 57.
Uh-huh. All right.
Yeah.
And what else? Can you remember anything else that was
Then, of
going on in
course,
52?
just to the west of the stainless steel line there, we had all the buffing machines set up in there that we had to take all these stainless steel parts and run them over these buffers, and
Okay,
clean
to
them up,
polish them.
polish them, yeah,
Uh-huh.
right, before
Okay.
they were sent up to the final assembly for
Yeah.
assembly.
Okay, so that was all there too.
Okay, so then if you want to go out to building 56,
Okay.
remember the big filler plates that we used to make out there?
Steel ones, not the
Steel.
plastic ones.
No, this
Yeah.
was long before plastic.
Yeah, okay.
And my gosh, old Roy Nelson, I'll never forget Roy. He used to work down there on those filler plates, and they were a bear, those filler plates were to make. And we had to make right and left hand, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah,
And it took, I don't know, I can't remember now. It looks like maybe 6 or 7 operations from the draw right on down to the finish of the filler plates. But that was a big project there. We made the hoods way up to the west end of building 56.
the filler plate line was sort of in the
the
middle of the
center.
building, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Right next to that big door that went out into the alleyway, sort of. Wasn't
No, more west of that.
Okay, west of that big door.
Right. The
All
filler plates now, the plastic machines are down there almost to the door where it goes out
Okay,
the
all
alleyway.
right. Okay.
These were
Well,
up-
maybe, was it the fender line then that sat right
Yes,
inside
there was
the
a
door?
fender line.
All right, that's what
As
was
a matter of
inside that.
fact, when that fender line went in right there, that was for the F-85 fender line.
Okay,
That's where we made the first
All right.
fenders. And as a matter of fact, that was one of my first jobs as a supervisor. Because this all happened right about 1959,
Yeah,
early 60,
yeah,
to
right,
get ready for 61 mile.
right.
And we had a terrible time with those 61 fenders. They were difficult design and very hard to make.
Mm-hmm.
But we spent some long hours on that. It wasn't anything to work 12, 14 hours a day.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, no, that was standard almost.
Okay,
Standard during model changeover.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, the fender line was right
Okay.
there, Jim.
And then the filler plate was a little further to the west of that.
That's
All
right.
right.
And then the hood's way on up.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
And then if you go out in building 34, they made all these small parts, some like that little disc I showed
oh,
you
yeah.
right over there.
Uh-huh.
And I gave you a number of smaller parts out there. The valve retainer, that job that we used to hammer that little baby out,
Okay,
was made out in building 34. And then building 37 was there, but there wasn't any presses into it.
okay.
Isn't that right?
37 was built in 1951.
Okay, so it was there.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any presses in it.
Maybe you remember guns?
Yeah.
Big,
They were just taking those guns out.
90 millimeter cannons. I
Yeah,
think
they
were
were just
making it
taking those out when I remember we setting up out there in building 37.
there. All right.
And eventually the main fender line and main bumper line moved to building 37.
Okay.
And I presume that's where they're still at.
Well, things are all different now.
I guess fenders went over across.
Yeah, right.
But there was, when I say there was a fender line in building 56, that was for the F-85.
Yeah.
And the fender line out in building 37 was for the 88 and 98.
Okay.
And also the Tornado line was out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At Tornado, I remember when we started that thing up, I was at
66 model.
1965 or 66.
Mm-hmm.
That was something else.
Sounded like each new car must have had some significant problems.
Oh, definitely. Very definite.
How long would it take us to get those kind of smoothed out so we would be okay?
Well, of course, it depended upon how serious the problem was, of course.
Mhm.
Some of them we had to just continually battle them all year long.
You did. They were just difficult.
They were difficult problems.
Mhm.
And part of that might be the original design. There's some things you can do with metal and some you can't. And if design engineering, designs a part and we at the die division do not have a representative there to say, no, Mr. Design Man, we can't make that. You know, we'd like to, but metal won't flow that way. Then we were in trouble. And that's one place that Lawrence Ginther did a tremendous job.
Okay.
Lawrence Ginther worked with Russ Hansen. Remember Russ Hansen? Sure. He and Russ Hansen worked with design engineering very closely. And the more they worked, the more they were able to design the shape of the draw ring that we used to draw the fenders on. Whether it was cut on an angle like this or whether it was up like this, made all the difference in the world. Whether you could make that part or whether you couldn't. And but Lawrence Ginther and Russ Hansen did a tremendous job in working with design engineering to get these dies to come in there where we could produce a better quality part.
Do you know whether he had to but have changes made in design so that they were buildable or makeable?
Oh, yes, definitely that happened.
That was not an uncommon occurrence.
No, it wasn't. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't even uncommon after we got the dies into our place. And we found out that we couldn't make that part on a quantity and quality basis that we demanded. And we might just literally cut that die up and start over again. So when I told you in the beginning that we made minor repairs, sometimes they were minor and sometimes they were major, but there was nothing that we wouldn't do to make that part right. And that's where you get the round the clock stuff.
Sure.
2 shifts, 12 hours a day. Never stop, 7 days a week. And it had to be, you know, because that line had a certain date it was going to run.
Did Lawrence Ginther was there for a fair amount of the time you were there? Apparently.
Yes, he was.
Oh, can you describe Lawrence to us? We don't know much about him, so to speak.
Well, Lawrence Ginther, Lawrence Ginther retired. He's the guy that retired when I went on as a general supervisor now.
Okay.
So
there's the reason.
He was my superintendent all the time. I was a foreman.
Okay.
So I was a foreman from 1959 until 1970. So for about 12 years, he was my my superintendent. I was a foreman. And sure, I can describe him. He was one of the hardest working, most conscientious people I ever knew in my life, and very brilliant. He had courage to make a change when other people would step back and be afraid of it. He was relentless in the way he drove his people. He demanded perfection. He got perfection. He treated his people fairly. It came to party time, Lawrence would party with any of them. He would be right out there on the floor, working with you with any problem you had. He just put in endless hours. He had a very good rapport with almost all of the vendors that we used to buy dies from. He would visit the die shops in Detroit, Republic, Distal, City Tool and Machine down in Toledo, Jarecki over in Grand Rapids, wherever. And if my job was one of them that we were having a problem with, I would go with Lawrence. If it was another foreman who had that particular job and his job was in problem, then that foreman would go.
Okay.
And we saw the problems right down here in the beginning. And if we didn't like them in the die shop, we were expected to come up with a solution. Lawrence expected that. And of course, he was the leader in
Sure.
making the solutions.
Yeah.
But it wasn't anything for us to start out to Detroit at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we might not be back until 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock that night.
Mm-hmm.
But you got paid for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Because that was just the way he worked.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same. We used to have a prototype shop down in Chicago. Can't remember the name of the place now. It was in a bad section of town. But we used to fly out of Lansing there and leave about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, get back 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. But, that's just part of the job. And but when you were at Oldsmobile, then of course you got paid your overtime.
Okay.
But when you were out on the road, you didn't get paid your overtime.
Yeah.
And you were out there doing the job for Oldsmobile. And I think that Lawrence Ginther commanded tremendous respect from Russ Hansen, who was a fully educated engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And Lawrence had never had any formal education at all. Guess he graduated out of the 5th or 6th grade.
Mm-hmm. Came up through the school, so
He
hard
sure
knock,
did.
so to speak.
Yeah, he sure did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he built the die division where it is today, or where it was when I left.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is too much today. I understand there's been some shrinkage, but Lawrence did build a die division. He didn't have much of a die tryout department at all when he went there.
Mm-hmm.
He probably had, I believe there was close to 300 employees. No, 200 employees when Lawrence quit. I think when Lawrence took over as superintendent, there might have been 100.
So
that's how
interesting.
that's how he increased the die division, and when he increased it.
This is a recording of R.C. Pete Munson of Lady Lake, Florida. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center on January 29th, 1989. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. Okay.
When I say that we improved or increased the size of the die division, we also increased the responsibilities. I can recall when I first went into the die division, I don't think we had any responsibilities up on the final assembly at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we ended up with a complete axle plant repair shop up there.
Oh, okay.
We took over all of the fixtures up there.
All right.
All the ones that would come down and we'll say set the gauging for the molding on the side, or set the gauging for establishing the door line on assembling the door, or that fixture that used to drop the top down onto the chassis.
The body, the body drop. Yeah.
We handled all of that stuff.
Okay, so you expanded in your width of responsibility.
Absolutely.
All right.
And
plus, you eventually got to plant 3 and plant all of that stuff.
None of plant 2, but all of plant 3, we got all of that. And that was a big expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there isn't any job that ever came along Lawrence Ginther wouldn't take on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he expanded his department.
Okay.
He made himself indispensable.
Yeah.
and he had the knowledge to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
who came along after Lawrence? You remember?
O.B. Rounds.
Okay, O.B. Rounds.
O.B. Rounds.
Don't know much about him either, so help us a little on him.
Well, O.B. Rounds was a little firecracker that lived out at Bath. And I lived out at Bath also for a while. So I knew O.B. from out there in my home area.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, O.B. was a sheep farmer. Used to call him the sheep farmer. And a couple of times, I don't know if you know anything about sheep or not, but sometimes they have twins and won't own both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of little small children, and Obi brought them over and let my kids raise them up as pet lambs. But anyhow, Obi worked at Oldsmobile, as I understand it now. Some of this is a bit vague, but he worked at Oldsmobile in his early career. And it must have all been before World War II.
Okay.
I believe during World War II, something happened about whether he became disenchanted with somebody, I don't know. But I believe he went over to Olson's
Mm.
or someplace else, or maybe he just plain quit and farmed.
Oh, all right.
One or the other. Because
In any event, he left.
Anyhow, he left Oldsmobile. Okay, after the war, long about 47, 48, 49, somewhere along in there. Again, Lawrence Ginther, as part of his building up his department, went out and got a hold of all these people that he knew could do a job. One of them, he went back and he got O.B. Rounds to come into Oldsmobile and go to work again.
Okay.
He brought him right in as a leader. Made him a supervisor within a year.
Okay.
And well, he should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a brilliant person.
Yeah.
And so Obie, in the beginning, when he came back to Oldsmobile, took over the automation department. That's how big that was getting at that time.
All right.
I mean, he was developing, working with all those things that I mentioned to you earlier. Okay, that was Obie's job. Well, eventually, after 4 or 5 years of this, then Obie took over as general foreman in the die division. And that was after, forget now who we succeeded, but I don't know. But he was very, very knowledgeable, very knowledgeable. I recall one instance when I was substituting as a foreman down in the die room, and I think it was along about 72, 73 when we had the oil crisis there, and we had to lay some people off.
Yeah.
I think I had to go back in the die room for 2 or 3 months or something like that. We had to cut down.
Yeah.
And I was running the machine floor over there. And Obie come along to me one day and he said, see that lathe operator up there? He says, go tell him to double his speed. And that's just the way Obie was. So I learned a real good lesson right there. Very good lesson right there. Obie was very smart. He knew his job.
Yeah.
He knew his job. And he stayed right with us. And as a matter of fact, Obie is the one that made a general foreman out of me.
Okay.
And he worked for about a year or two after he made a general foreman out of me. He was superintendent then. Obie became superintendent when Lawrence Ginther left. And let's see, Obie had to be superintendent until about 1974 or 75.
All right.
He quit.
All right.
Yeah, that's when he retired.
All right. Now, did he manage the organization different than Lawrence Ginther did? How did?
A little bit. Lawrence Ginther seemed to have a better rapport with the outside vendors.
All right.
He seemed to want to get the problems corrected out there before they ever got to Oldsmobile. And Obie had a different way of handling that. And I don't know which is right. I guess they both had their advantages. But Obie would send his general foreman out, and we would go out there, and Obie wouldn't go out. He stayed more or less right at Oldsmobile.
All right.
He felt that he wanted to be right on the job there and tend to those type meetings and type things that superintendents have to attend to. And he would send us out. Once in a great while, he would go out. But more or less, the general foreman, myself and Gene Klotz, sort of took over the job that Lawrence Ginther had.
Okay.
And Obie stayed more or less put right there in the die room. One thing about it, I'd have to say that Lawrence Ginther was a much better die tryout man than Obie Rounds.
Okay.
Obie Rounds was more of a die maker.
All right.
And there is a little bit of a difference there, you know, you can see. Obie would rather repair and build a die right in the die room than he would to go out here in the press room and make that die run. And so I would say that of the two, and I'm not taking anything
no.
away from either
No,
one,
no, different
because they're
people.
both brilliant
Yeah.
people, is that Lawrence was a better die trial man and Obie was a better die maker.
Okay.
And so I think that might be one of the reasons that Obie felt that he was better off to send some of us that were maybe a little more familiar with die trial
Yeah.
out to the vendors
Yeah.
and catch some of the problems out there.
Mhm.
But that's about the only difference in the way they
Alright.
work. Both of them extremely fair,
Yeah.
good men,
Yeah.
and well qualified.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And now we have a little,
Oh, thank you.
what, your tonsils. I've been talking too much, huh?
See now, Obie left and somebody else came.
Obie left and then my good friend Dick Richards took over.
Mhm.
And
He was there till you left, wasn't
no, Dick was my boss for 3 or 4 years.
he? Oh, okay.
And then he was still there when
Yeah.
I left.
Yeah, he was
Yes.
still there when you left. Okay.
And then I think Dick must have worked about 3 or 4 years after that.
Now, did Dick change the management approach at all? Can you describe Dick a little bit?
I don't think all that much. Dick put more, gave more authority and more options to his general foreman,
Okay.
I think, than the other two did.
All right.
I don't think Dick was quite as close to the job.
All right.
He again started going back out into the vendor field.
All right.
But by the same token, he didn't restrict any of the general foreman from going out into the vendor field. So there was that little bit.
Okay.
And other than that, why things went along pretty much the same. Nobody seemed to do for the department what Lawrence Ginther did.
All right.
Lawrence Ginther was really the driving force of the whole department.
Mhm.
And if I had to guess from what I know right now, everything has gone downhill.
Okay.
I understand that production supervision is even supervising in the die division now.
May very well do.
And I personally think that's a terrible mistake.
Mhm.
Because Jim, I don't know how you feel about it, but my wife and I were just talking here today or yesterday. She being an ex-school teacher, as you know, she substitutes once in a while. And one day last week, I guess she was in the school and she was teaching a Spanish class.
Mhm.
Well, my wife doesn't know the first word about Spanish in OCC.
Mhm.
And
Right.
she said she felt very inadequate.
Well, I think you would. Yeah.
And I feel the same way. I don't know how a sheet metal production foreman can go into a die room and try to be a supervisor. I, for the life of me, cannot understand it.
Mhm.
Now, I know that's not the philosophy of the management today,
Yeah.
but it's certainly not my belief, I'll tell you, because I always felt fairly capable, and if I told a man to do a job, I could tell him how, and I knew about how much time it better take.
Mhm. Because you've been there.
Because I've been there, and I don't know how a production foreman can do that. So I think there might be cases and times when he might feel inadequate, but nevertheless,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
far be it from me to say
Yeah. It's one of those things.
too much about that.
Did you get involved with the plastics side of the house at all, Pete?
A little bit, a little bit.
Okay.
I guess more than a little bit. Yeah, I was there when we made pillar plates and front end panels and
Okay. Now that was a
No, I-
significant change in what I call technology in a sense.
very much so.
Did that cause any unique happenings that were different for your kinds of folks than would have happened, for example, with sheet metal? Because it's an entirely different kind of thing now.
Well, it was another learning process, you might say, similar to stainless steel.
Mm-hmm.
Die makers and die trial people, die division people are always people that are going to improve their knowledge. Whatever problems come up, they're going to cope with, whatever it takes. Again, that's Lawrence Ginther speaking. Whatever it takes to do the job, that's what we'll do.
Sure.
And so molds were the same thing. In effect, molds were very similar to a die, except they didn't have this progressive type thing as we talked about here a while ago. They were a single stage operation.
Right.
And
you really weren't forming anything.
We
You were
weren't
just,
forming anything. Well,
squirting
it was squirting it. That's
Yeah.
right. And it had to do with temperatures. It had to do with time. It had to do with chemicals. And so we had to become a little bit familiar with all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as changing the shape of the mold, that was just the same as changing the shape of the die.
Yeah.
We didn't have any trouble with that.
Yeah.
And
were the problems similar in nature or different?
I would say they were different.
Okay.
They were different in that we had to learn a little bit about mixes, chemical mixes.
Okay.
We had to learn a little bit about how long does it take to come down and hold the top half and the bottom half of a mold together for that plastic to harden up so you can open it back up and release your part.
Yeah.
Those type things, Jim, I would say were the basic things.
Okay. And then somewhere in there, this SMC stuff came along. Was that also part of you folks'?
Yes, it was. We handled all the SMCs.
Okay.
And I was sort of thinking the SMC right along with the injection
All right.
molds.
Okay. It's part of that.
They were all similar problems: heat, mix, time elements, and so on and so forth. We had the flow of the mixture sometimes was too great or not enough, and that would make the part too thick or too thin. That did not involve us too much.
Okay.
It involved us to the point that it made a defective part.
Yeah.
But we used to call the engineer in at that point in time, and he would establish the amount of mix.
All right. So he was kind of the guy that figured out how much and where and that kind of stuff.
Yes. As far as the labor and so on and so forth, and the polishing and the repair, maintenance, so we took care of all that.
All right. Okay. Pete, how about labor relations over that 30 years or so? How did that change? Any changes there that you could describe?
I think to some degree the labor relations department had their work really cut out for them. In the beginning, I'm going to say, and I can only speak from about 1959 because that's when I became aware of management problems.
Yeah.
I think that in 1959, we as management probably had a little more control over our people than what we did on the day that I left in 1980. In fact, I'll say we had a lot more control. It seemed that through a series of bargaining contracts, a little bit was given away each time. It seems that we used to get X number of people, and I always used to refer to it as 10% of your people cause you 90% of your problems.
Yeah.
And this doggone 10%, they seem to have grown from the maybe 2% in 1959 to the 10% in 1980. But those buggers were always the ones that gave you all the headaches. I think your committee men got much smarter, much more aggressive, which made our job as managers much more difficult.
Sure.
I think the technicalities, I compare it to a lawyer right today, having to deal with so many technicalities when he is dealing with a criminal. If he doesn't handle it just right, why he loses the case just like that. And that happens so often with us. We had our first line supervisor that, doggone it, if he's going to be doing his job that I want him to do out there, as far as handling making a good part, keeping his people on the job and one thing and another, all the problems that he has. He's got a hard time keeping up with this contract and learning all the details. That's just a little minor thing with him as compared to a committee man. That's his major job.
Mm-hmm.
He should know, that committee man knows every word in that contract.
Mm-hmm.
And he can, normally speaking, run circles around a first line foreman.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, it fell to the general foreman a lot of times to handle the labor relations end of it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as it did all the time when it became a major problem. Always found the fellas over in labor relations, can't even think of any of their names now, but real good to work with. Would always help you out, but there was only so much they could do,
Mm-hmm.
and we knew it,
Mm-hmm.
but yet we didn't let them.
Yeah.
What's this redheaded fella's name? John Powell.
John Power.
John
Yeah.
Powell.
Uh-huh.
Always got a kick out of John. Always liked him. John, for a while, taught out of, when I first run into John, he came from GM Tech.
Yeah.
And he came over and was in pre-foreman management or some sort.
Sure. Instructing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I was one of the first ones in that pre-foreman school.
Mm-hmm.
John Powers was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That was an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I run into him.
Okay.
But labor relations got a tough job. I mean, they got a contract they got to live by.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I know they have to do things they don't want to do sometimes. But I don't know how this thing now, this quality of life deal is working out for them down there. I go back there to Lansing once in a while and I sit around and I see some guy out on the street. And I said, God, it's the middle of the morning, or
Mhm.
this guy's supposed to be working.
Mhm.
Yeah, but he gets free time. I can't understand that, you know.
Mhm.
And I guess I'm of the old school.
Yeah. Yeah. Times do change. Well, okay. Any what I would call unique happenings, or what maybe you might think most significant happening during your 30 years there, Pete? That
Oh, I don't know. I guess I would, one of the things I'm most proud of was that I guess I was the first graduate apprentice after
okay.
World War II. So thankful to have the opportunity to work for Oldsmobile. I thank him the first of every month. And more than that, seriously, I preach the good word of Oldsmobile day in and day out to
Mhm.
people. I'm certainly one of their best ambassadors. I know that.
That's great.
I have no problem with that. I think that they offered me the greatest opportunity that life could ever present to me, and I was able to take advantage of it. And I'm forever thankful for that. I think that Oldsmobile has always tried their level best to build the best automobile that goes on the road. Some of them get out there that aren't quite so good, but it isn't because of the people there that are not trying. I know that. There's bound to be the human error somewhere along the line. You're going to get that early Monday morning or late Friday afternoon car, and there isn't anything that the most conscientious supervisor can do about it. It's going to happen. All we can hope for is that the dealer out here can
Mhm.
catch it and before somebody gets hurt. So to me, I think that the progress that Old's
That's
made
great.
since I went to work there, it's just phenomenal. When people tell me that they don't make the cars like they used to, I get rather upset. You know, and I speak my piece. It bothers me when I see people with foreign automobiles. Bothers me tremendously. I make friends very easily in this park, and we have 9 old General Motors supervisors in this park, and we have little meetings once in a
Sure.
while.
Very nice.
I just can't say enough for Oldsmobile and General Motors, in its entirety. You're gonna run into a bad apple, and I'm not
Oh,
counting
sure.
those
No,
people,
that's, yeah.
but I'm talking
That's-
overall,
yeah.
overall.
Well, that's
Marvelous insurance programs, marvelous retirement programs, good friendships, and from years ago, I still am associated with many, many people that I worked with, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I enjoy coming back to Lansing. I do not go back into the factory,
Mhm.
the shop. Never have been back in, and for no particular reason. But I always see a great number of my friends when I come to Lansing. But I guess, Jim, that's about it, you know.
Okay, that's good,
Summarizing.
Pete. Oh, that's a good job. Excellent job. You did.